social media things I'm on as well. So maybe picking it up there. But the best way to follow these probably is to follow the link at the top and get the HAPS application or sign up to HAPS there, and you get a more integrated experience. But anyway, that's what we're doing. So this weekend there's a project running really all across the world called the City Nature Challenge, and that's a project where people are being encouraged in urban areas to get out and record as much wildlife as they can. I need a lot of prompting to do myself. It's being organised on a website called iNaturalist. That's the letter I and then the word naturalist. And if you look up iNaturalist, you can sign up there. I'm not going to particularly talk about how you sign up to the project today. That's been done on other broadcasts, including one by Lisa Betancourt, which is worth looking out for. But what I thought I'd do is I'd take the opportunity of thinking like this to just talk through what we mean when we talk about a scientifically useful wildlife record, and what you need to do to gather a record that is useful and helpful. And I tend to summarise this as the minimum requirement is 4 W's, which is what, when, where, and who, not necessarily in that order. So let me talk about each of those and what they mean. So perhaps the first one is what. You want to record, write down what you have seen. And in a way that sounds obvious. You look at something, if you identify it, you say what it is. Ideally, you would identify it to the most detailed level you can, which is typically, if you can, down to species level, but you could go to subspecies, you could go into further things. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't identify things that far, and you may need to identify them to a higher level. So looking around us now, you see we're in a woodland here. You can see lots and lots of plants, and probably the most obvious plant are these bluebells. And it might be you know what these are. And we'll talk on another occasion perhaps about how you go at identifying different things, but you would look at various features and see what it is. So it might be you don't really know what this is. Perhaps this isn't the sort of environment you've been to before. Perhaps this isn't where you're from. You don't know what this is. You just know, perhaps at least all you can say is it's a plant. Well, that is at least something. It is at least a start of identification. Plant. But you might be able to go further. You might know it's some type of bluebell, and you might know that the genus of bluebell is Hyacinthoides, the scientific genus. So you might be able to write down it's a bluebell of some kind, and ideally, if you know it, you would write down the scientific name, Hyacinthoides. And then you might know further. You might be able to tell by the shape of the flower and the way it's drooping and the way it's hanging that this is actually the English or the British bluebell. It's known as and has a scientific name, Hyacinthoides non-scripta. So you would write that down as what you've got. But you write down as much as you can. If you can't identify something at the species level, try and identify it to a higher taxonomic level. And that's the first part of a record. What have I seen? What is this? The next parts were when, where, and who. So when is perhaps the easiest. When did you see it? So this we saw today. So I would probably write down for that the 1st of May 2021. It seems enough information, really. Sometimes when you're going through records, or when you're going through particularly some of the older records, or where you've been recording things using things like trapping methods and survey methods that record things over a period of time, you might not know that. So you might only know that it was in May, or you might only know that it was in some wider period, but you try and record when you saw it, because that's a really important piece of data and a really important thing in identifying a record. You might also want to record some facts about it beyond just the species identity that we were talking about. So for these bluebells that we were looking at, you would probably want to record that it was in flower, and that then links to that data on when you saw it. So that's a thing that is interesting for people to know. Okay, they were flowering on the 1st of May. It's useful to know. Helps people also check the record. If I said they were flowering on the 1st of November, people would probably question that record and it will be flagged up, and it will be a useful way of checking. So that's when, probably the easiest of them. The next W is where did you record it? And this one, in a way, sounds really simple again. You just put down where you were. So here I am, I'm in Perryvale Wood. So as a minimum, I could just say I saw something in Perryvale Wood. The problem with that is that probably doesn't mean a great deal to most of you who are watching this, because you don't know where it is. You might these days be able to type that into a internet search engine of your choice and work it out, but it's not very helpful, and it might not keep that name forever. This wood used to be called Bradish Wood, but hardly anybody calls it that now. So if a long time ago we'd written down we'd seen something in Bradish Wood, people wouldn't know it was here necessarily. So what I think of as good practices is that if you can, write down some sort of systematic coordinate system. And there's probably two main ones that get used. One is if you can record latitude and longitude, that will give you a pretty precise location. And here in the UK, we use a separate system quite often based on the Ordnance Survey's grid reference system. And that gives you a series of numbers that will allow you to identify precisely where somewhere is. Now, another question is, of course, how accurate do you want to be in your recording? With modern technology, modern GPS systems, such as the one on this phone, it's pretty easy to get an accurate record down to at least, to within about 10 meters of where you are. With more careful measurements, you can get really precise locations. And to some extent, it's a matter of choice. Generally, more accurate data will be more useful, but you can start to get into quite spurious accuracy. So you can see behind me and on the other side around, these bluebells that we were talking about as an example of something you might want to record extend over a huge area. So is it really interesting for me to measure precisely to the nearest meter where one of them is and record that? Or do I just want to record a sort of broader area? Similarly, with things that are moving, you can hear around me probably crows and ring-necked parakeets, certainly, and probably some other birds. Well, these can fly, of course. These can move around a lot. So I could work out precisely where I'm sitting to the nearest meter. I could work out precisely where that bird just over there is to the nearest meter, and I could write that down and I could put that record in. But it's a bit pointlessly accurate because the bird will fly. The bird can fly more than a meter, more than 10 meters, more than 100 meters. So what I tend to do is for things that can fly about, I'll record typically to a 1 kilometer, a square 1 kilometer on each side. I typically say things there. Sometimes to a square 100 meters on each side, particularly when I'm doing formal surveys with things like moth traps and the like, which you may have seen on some of my other broadcasts. I'll record it to a bit more accurately where it is. But when you're recording stuff that can move around, generally I'm not going to be that precise. Plants, maybe if there was a really special plant, a really particular plant I found that I really want to record where it was. Plants tend not to fly around. It's one of their features. They tend to stay where they are. So a really precise recording of where a plant is could be really much more useful. And that could lead to people in the future being able to come back and find precisely the plant and the location I was looking at. So as accurate as you want, really. You won't do any harm by recording to an extremely accurate location. But if you're recording stuff that moves, maybe, don't worry. But that's where. And then the final W in my list of 4 W's for a wildlife record was who. Now that's not who saw the record, although it often would be. It's who worked out and who is saying what species it is, where that was the first thing that we talked about. Now that's often going to be you if you're out recording. I'm out recording today. We were looking at those bluebells, we were looking at those things. I was the person who said what they are. So that would go down that who said it was that? It was David Howe. Why is that important? Well, it's important for 2 reasons. One is if somebody wants to come back and say, are you sure it was that, David? Did you check something? They need to know who said that. The other, which is sort of similar, is it helps when you're assessing records as a scheme. If you get to know that that's been identified by somebody who's known, who knows about the group of organisms in question, you can probably rely on it. If it's not, you might need to query the record, you might need to check it. So that's who. So that's the 4 W's when you're making a wildlife record, when you're observing wildlife. You want what you've seen to be useful when you submit it to the schemes that record things. The 4 things you need: what did you see, identified as accurately as you can; where did you see it, again identified, located with a reasonable degree of precision to allow people to have a good sense of where it is, using whatever technology you've got to let you do that. When did you see it? I would say at least record, if you can, the day on which you saw it, and include the month and the year, of course. Possibly the time of day, again, depending on the species, the time of day could be interesting. So record all that. And finally, who worked out what the thing that you've written down in your what it was description. Who's that? That's often going to be you, but it might be a friend, it might be an expert, it might be somebody else. And those 4 bits of data are the key things to making a wildlife record. You can add a whole bunch of other stuff that can be really interesting and really useful, but those 4 are really the minimum for a record to be useful. So what I thought we'd do now is we'd go for a bit of a walk through the wood, see if we can find something I haven't already recorded today, and just run through as an example doing that recording. So you can see here we are wandering through the wood, looking out. It's always unusual when I'm doing these broadcasts because I'm wandering through without a butterfly net and without various bits of equipment I would normally have to help me find things, to help me get a good look at things. But we'll see what we can do. We'll see if we can make some progress. We'll see if we can find something that I haven't already recorded. And then as a quick reminder, we'll run through that list of things I would need to write down if I wanted to record these, whatever it is we find. So I'm just really looking around for something that we haven't seen already. Okay, well, here's something. Anybody who's really upset by the sight of dead furry animals may wish to close their eyes. But I happen to notice down here on the path, we've got this dead animal. So what I'm going to do, I want to turn this dead animal here into a wildlife record that might be of use to scientists, to people who study this nature reserve. What am I going to have to do? Well, I go back to that list. 4 letter W. What, where, when, and who. And we'll do them in a slightly different order to that because 2 of them are easy. So when, I would write down, I suspect for this, I would just put down today's date, the 1st of May. I probably wouldn't put down much further than that. I don't think it's particularly significant, particularly since it's dead and it's obviously been here. It may have been here a while. I don't think I would bother putting down the time of day or anything like that. But if you really felt like it, you could. So first W I've filled in on my bit of paper, which I will when I get back home and write it down, is when. It's today, it's the 1st of May 2021, and I will put that down. The next thing I would do is I would want to say, well, where am I? And one of the advantages of the modern world is we all have devices like this. The press of a button, that gives me the location. The numbers at the top, which are probably what I would write down if I was recording here in the UK, are the grid reference. Just the Ordnance Survey grid reference, which is our national mapping scheme. And that consists of 2 numbers and then either 4, 6, 8 or 10 numbers, 2 letters, and then a series of numbers. And they tell us, in effect, where we are. That 10-figure grid reference is locating us to the nearest 1 metre square, so a square 1 metre on each side. But if you look down here, well, the device accuracy is only to 5 metres, so that's a bit pointless. So I would probably just record this to the nearest 1 kilometre square, which would be TQ1683. That's the way that works. But you could record it more precisely. The alternative, latitude, longitude, or longitude and latitude, I can never remember which one's which. But again, it gives a similar accuracy, and you would choose what degree of accuracy you want. So that would give you where. I would also write down the name of the site, Perivale Wood, because that's still interesting. But the grid reference really tells you where it is. And then I would come to the challenging bit of saying, well, what am I seeing? What is this animal? So, as a starting point, it's an animal. So as an absolute minimum record, I could put down Animalia, Animal Kingdom. That's not of much use to anybody, but it would make it a record if I recorded that. I could notice that it's a furry animal. It's here in the UK, so it's probably a mammal. So Mammalia, so that's getting a bit more precise. You then start to get into sort of having to know the group, but looking at this, I know that this is a shrew, which is Sauricidae. The family is Sauricidae, I think, the scientific name. And more specifically, it's a shrew in the genus, another subdivision of how we split animals up, quite Saurex. I actually am not certain which species of shrew this is. I think I know. So if I was going to walk away now with what I've got, I would only record this as Saurex, S-O-R-E-X, that genus. I wouldn't claim I know what species it is. But I would also, if I was doing this properly, I would probably take some photographs. I might take some measurements, take some images. I might even keep the specimen and take that back. And that would allow me possibly to work out with some literature and get more precisely to what species it is. But I would write down, for this one, at the moment, I'll be writing down Saurex, S-O-R-E-X as the genus. There are also some flies visiting it, which I'd also try and record if I was doing this properly as well. And the final W will be who has said that this is a Saurex? Well, David Houghton has. So this won't be easy because it's me. I've written it down. But suppose I took those pictures, took those measurements, took it back, and still couldn't work out what it was. Couldn't quite be sure if I knew what species it was. And I might share those pictures with people, or I might have kept the specimen and let somebody see that. And they would then tell me what it was. And then when I put the record in with their identification, I would put them down as who identified it. So there we go. That's what we've got. What have we got? Saurex species, a shrew. Who identified it? I did, David Howden. Where is it? Perivale Wood, at that grid reference we looked at before. And when was it? Today, the 1st of May. So that would now be, the data will be a wildlife record, and I would send that data to someone who records the mammals. Here in London, that would be the mammal recorder for the London Natural History Society. And from him, that would go into various other recording schemes, into the national schemes, into the local schemes, and that data would then be known and would be useful and would be used. So what I'm talking about, when you're out seeing wildlife, if you want what you've seen to be useful data, you need to share those records with other people. And on this, which is going out all over the internet and all over the world, of course, it's hard to say where you should send the data and where you should send the records in your country. But in the UK, we tend to have a variety of national and local recording schemes for different organisms. If you've got a local natural history society, they will likely be gathering stuff and collecting data. And as we were talking about, what you really need for something to be a wildlife record is those 4 W's. What did you see? If at all possible, including a scientific name as well as the local name, so that it can be understood internationally, so it can be understood by anyone really. What did you see? Who identified it as that? Where did you see it? And when did you see it? And if you capture that data, when you're out looking at wildlife, the stuff you've seen, that information, when you share it with people, will be useful, and it can be usable scientific data that can be helpful. There's a lot more to wildlife recording than that. There's all sorts of methods and formal schemes and formal approaches and more complex things, but that's sort of the minimum, the core. If you can do that, you will have something that is useful. And if you're taking part in the City Nature Challenge, which we started by talking about, something that's going on all around the world this weekend, where we are trying to record as much wildlife as we can in urban areas, that's what you want to be recording to get people using your data. And it's just the same if what you're doing as part of your recording, assuming you have relevant permissions where that's needed and relevant authority, is retaining specimens. And we'll quickly have a look at some specimens, or a specimen, which I will just take off here. So this is something I'm still working on, and I will just turn the camera around. So you can see here a little bee that I found. I actually found this last weekend. So you can see I've got down at the bottom of the label here the date. I saw it on the 25th of April 2021. I saw it in Perivale Wood in Pondfield. I haven't actually written a grid reference on that, which is very naughty of me. The number at the top, which looks like a date, is actually a unique number for the specimen in the collection here at Perivale Wood. And I haven't yet really worked through what this is. So I'm pretty happy that it's a bee in the genus Nomada, one of the nomad bees. So if that's as far as I get, I'm going to write another label down which says Nomada, and we'll put down who said that it was that. Me, I did. But I am going to use this rather nice book here, Field Guide to the Bee, to try and work through and see if I can actually work out which species of nomad bee it is. And if I can do that, I'll write that on the data label. Again, put down that I identified it. And that's what you do with specimens. Again, the same 4 things are absolutely, so the key minimum that you would have on a data label. What is it? Who said it was that? Where was it from? And when was it from? So with that, I think we'll stop there. Do get out, do record wildlife, do submit it to the City Nature Challenge, and do make sure you share your sightings, you share what you've got with the recording schemes, with the people who are gathering data, wherever you are, because that will turn a nice walk outside into a nice walk outside that's also scientifically